Since our podcast is all about Wilsons, you certainly talk about the origin of the name. Well, I found a genealogist named Wilson who knows where our roots began. Welcome to episode 2 of our introduction trilogy of the Cuz Wilson Show. This is where we talk about people, places, and things named Wilson. You know, when I tell people about this show and what I'm doing, they usually ask one or two of the following 3 questions. Are you going to talk about the volleyball from the movie Castaway? Or they ask, are you going to talk about the heritage or the origin of the name? And then sometimes they ask, what made you want to start a podcast about Wilsons? So I split all 3 of those questions into 3 different episodes I call the introduction trilogy of the Cuz Wilson Show. If you haven't listened to our first episode yet, please do, and then hit subscribe so you'll be notified next Wilson Wednesday of our latest episode. And for this week's People, Places, and Things, I've already told you who we're going to talk about for the people category. And in our places category, we traveled to a town in Scotland where there are 2 monuments for the same young girl named Wilson. And for the thing topic of people, places, and things, we will learn about a Wilson who had a genius idea that transformed the whole garment industry back in the old days in Scotland. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Claire Wilson. She's a professional genealogist based in central Scotland. She studied genealogy at the university, and she would later set up her own company, Treehouse Genealogy, where she assists clients worldwide to find out more about their own Scottish roots. And she says there's always a war hero or a scandal just waiting to be found.
Thank you so much, Kenny. It's a delight to speak to you today. So yes, my name is Claire and I'm a Wilson as well. I am a professional genealogist. My company is called Treehouse Genealogy and I am located in central Scotland, so just between Glasgow and Edinburgh. I help clients worldwide to explore their British roots, especially those that have Scottish ancestry. And I also specialise in Commonwealth Air Force research as well. So I've got a variety of services, everything from full family trees to single ancestor studies, a bit of document retrieval. I might need to dig about in the archives for someone. Planning ancestral tours, which a lot of people from across the ponds love to do. They love to find
That's on my bucket list. I want to go. I've never been to Scotland, and I definitely want to go.
I've done that for quite a few clients, sort of looking into the research and then sort of planning places they might want to visit during their trip.
Good.
And then also brick walls. So, if someone gets a bit stuck with their research and they need a bit of a helping hand, I can step in and just help with that bit of research. And I would say that a huge part of my clients actually come from America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand.
Really?
Because the Scots were so mobile.
Yeah.
They made the world their home. So, the descendants of those Scottish people want to find out and come to me. Companies, it tends to be more people like lawyers that are tracing wills that perhaps come for a bit of research. So I would say the majority is individual clients.
So we're going to talk about all kinds of things in the realm that you live in and work in, and it's your company. I frankly don't remember how I found you, other than I was looking for. I did a search for Scotland and genealogy, and it had several people. But hey, there's one named Wilson. And that's what's exciting about what we're doing, is we're helping people to learn about their background. But when you see a street sign that says Wilson, or you see a truck that has Wilson on the side of the product they sell, it just touches you. But this, what we're talking about today, is for the people like what happened to me. I got hooked on learning the history, and I really want to delve deep into it. And what you're talking about, having a tour, giving us a guided tour. When I go to Scotland, I'll know how to get to Wilson Town and why do I want to see Wilson Town and what happened there.
So, yeah, well, you mentioned Wilson Town, so, what better place to start? So, Wilson Town, I think it was formed around about the 1770s,
Okay.
and it's in central Scotland. It's not too far from where I live in central Scotland. And it was established by three brothers who were all called Wilson. So you had John, William, and Robert Wilson.
Huh.
And the Wilsons actually owned land in that area. And when they started up the ironworks, they needed housing for their workers. So they set up this little village which had housing, eventually schools for the children, and that's where the workers were housed that worked in the ironworks.
How about that?
And it became a community sort of from the ground up after that.
Huh. That's cool. So they were already named Wilson when they started the ironworks business and
Yeah,
or formed the town. Is that correct?
yeah, and they
Okay.
named it Wilson Town.
So how did they come up with? Were there who was there? Was their dad or parents the first Wilsons?
Yeah,
In
so they owned, they were landowners in that area. Their father, and yeah, landowners in that area. So they had extra land with starting up the ironworks. It's quite rural, the area, so they
uh-huh.
had to try and find somewhere for the workers, because in those days you didn't have cars, the same as what we do now. So a lot of the time people didn't have horses and carts even.
Wow.
It was only the wealthy that maybe would have horse and cart, so they would have to walk to work. So it made sense for
Yes.
them to build housing for the workers so that they could get to the workplace, or the company would have failed otherwise. So yeah, Wilson Town is still, a little kind of village or town. The ironworks have gone. It is
Okay.
now private residences, and I would say that the area is now a bit more associated with forestry. So there's a lot
Uh,
of forestry in the area, and tree felling. But I mean, the name still reflects that Wilson heritage, and
cool.
and where it came from, which is pretty amazing.
So there's still a town that has a sign that says Wilson Town or
Yeah,
whatever. Do
yeah.
you have populations on your signs like we do? Sometimes we have
No,
Wilsonville population 214 or
yeah,
something.
not so much, not so much. But I probably could find out and let you know.
It's not that important, but I was just visualizing if I wanted to visit it, I would stay in Edinburgh at a hotel
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something like
yeah,
that, and then I would take a short drive. It'd be in what, an hour away or something.
yeah, yeah. About that.
What about the Wilson name? And is son of Will or son of William or what
Yeah,
is it?
so it's well, not argument, but it's one of those debates that you hear a lot of people. Um, they always think if your name's Wilson, we all have to be related, which is just not the case.
Oh, okay.
Surnames in Scotland were adopted around about the 12th century, especially among the upper classes. And over time, the surnames became more widely used as a way of distinguishing people, from person to person. And a lot of it related to tax, and getting taxes in. It's always about money.
Sure. That was in Bible days.
But I mean, there were sort of remote areas, in the Northern Isles and parts of the Highlands, that surnames really weren't commonly used until even the 18th and 19th centuries.
I understand that there's a family called Gunn that might have some Wilson roots.
Yeah, so the Wilson name is what they would call a patronymic name, a relational name. So these are based on the parent's name, and I'll give you a couple of examples. When you think of the surname Mackenzie,
Uh-huh.
that means son of Kenneth.
Oh, really? And that's my name.
Yeah, so when you think of Wilson, Wilson is actually son of Will or William.
Either one.
Yeah, and I mean, they say that it's one of those names that was sort of introduced in Britain by William the Conqueror.
As I was doing research, I saw one with Wilson with the E on the end. Can you tell me that? What happens in the spellings?
I mean, to give you an example, I was doing research in Ireland for a client who the relative was called, of all names, James Bond.
Ah.
Okay, couldn't write it, could you? James Bond. Could I find a birth record for James Bond? No. Eventually, I did find it. With a lot of persistence. The surname was actually spelt Bon, Bawn.
Oh.
And then when I really thought about it, I thought, I could see this official saying, "And what's your name?" And this Irish guy saying, "James Bond."
Oh.
So when you say it with an Irish accent, Bond doesn't sound like Bond, it sounds more like Bon. So
Yes.
yeah, I could see how things could be picked up and spelt differently. And if you then end up with a piece of paper that has your child's birth and that's how the official's written it because you can't read or write, you perhaps show that to other people and that's the way that your spelling of your name would become.
Now, why is it popular for Wilsons to have one L instead of two? When I have to admit that Wilson with two L's makes more sense if it's son of William.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Maybe that was the original one.
Yeah, it might have been.
Maybe it was. But yeah, I mean, it's all just down to officials and the way things were spelled. And, back in the days when people couldn't spell too good, you see a lot of different variants, with the E, with two L's. Sometimes I've seen it with an I in there somewhere, like Willison as well, which could be a variant of Wilson.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
What about Wilson Town? Is it one L or two?
It's one.
It's one L. Okay.
It's one, yeah, yeah. So if you're abroad and you're in America and your name's Wilson and you want to find out, where are my Wilsons from, there are two ways that you can sort of look at it. The first way would be through traditional research. Build your family tree. If you're outside of the UK, I always say to clients in America, look for the earliest known settler ancestor that was in America. So go back on your family tree, look at your grandfather, your great grandfather, and find that ancestor that was the one who initially settled in America. But I always say to people, if, for instance, your ancestors settled in, say, Pennsylvania, go to the town in Pennsylvania that they originally settled and go to the local library or the local records office and try and see if there are any records relating to early settlers or, if there were later settlers, what records exist that might tell you more about them and potentially where they came from. Was it Scotland? Was it Ireland? So sometimes people are so eager to just delve into the research and say, I need to look in Scotland. But that piece of information might be in the archives or the library in America. So yeah, go looking for that first. So yeah, I mean, there's traditional research, but then also DNA testing. I don't specialise in any way in DNA tests. I have tested my own DNA. It can reveal geographical regions that you came from, so it compares your test with everyone else in the database. And some of them are pretty accurate. The Ancestry one, not throwing anything out there, but the one that I had done for Ancestry, really looking at the research that I've done, can pinpoint, this whole batch of family within central Scotland, which my paternal family are nearly all from. So, it is pretty accurate, but it also gives you the chance to connect with people who are DNA matches and work with them to try and compare what research they've done and what research you've done yourself. But I would always say if you do match with someone, go away and check things yourself, because you don't know what the other person's research skills are like, and always double check what information you can. I think maybe it's a good point just now, really, to sort of talk about the internet. I mean, the internet only has a fraction of what you might need when you do research. So
Really?
yeah, I mean, we're all familiar with the big subscription websites that want $100 or whatever off us every year to be able to search. But they actually average that there's somewhere between 10 and 20% of genealogical records are actually online. That is between the subscription websites and what's available on archives and record office sites to search online. So that means the rest of it is still sitting in physical format within archives and libraries to be searched.
That's incredible. So you can really find either more accurate and or more stories or more histories.
So yeah, I mean, there aren't a lot, I think everyone thinks that you sign up to these genealogical websites and you're going to find everything on it. A lot of the Scottish records in particular have been transcribed. So you don't see the actual copy of the record. You only have the name, the place, and the date.
Okay.
And the hazard with that is that the original record potentially has a lot more information.
Wow.
So if you think of, a baptism or a marriage within church registers, you might only get on their entry a typed out name, date, place. But if you check the original record, you might have whereabouts they lived within that place, what patients were. You might even have witnesses who were godparents at that baptism. So there's a lot more information can be found within the original records as well.
Were there any big battles that were famous between Wilsons and somebody else?
Not that I know of, but I know that the Wilsons that had the tartan, that designed all the tartan, they actually were from a place called Bannockburn, which is, if you've ever watched Braveheart and, William Wallace, and, that's Bannock, the Battle of Bannockburn. So they came from that area.
Well, Claire, I want to thank you for taking your time away from your research and allowing me to interview you. And I'm so excited to have you on one of our early episodes of the Cuz Wilson Show. And it's been really pleasure. I've learned a lot already, and now I really want to come meet you in person. So.
I know, how cool would that be? I'm so excited.
Good. I'm glad. Well, I'm hoping that other people, of our listeners, will find in various episodes, will take something they hear and go down a rabbit trail, go down a road, and get in their car or get in a plane and go to some really interesting places named Wilson and meet some fantastic people named Wilson. And that is something I'm really excited about, Claire. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Ken.
Now, you just need to know that wasn't a commercial, and Claire didn't pay us anything to be interviewed, and we didn't have to pay her either, because she was gracious enough to donate some of her time. If you need a little help completing your research on your heritage, contact Claire. She offers a free consultation to discuss your research requirements. Her contact information is in the show notes at cuzwilson.com. Okay, now I have a question for you. If you listen to this episode and you're from Scotland, I want you to send us a recipe for some traditional Scottish foods like neeps, tatties, cullen skink, or Scotch broth, or stovies. Of course, I don't have a clue what any of those are, but you know what? We'll add it to our Cuz Crunch place, and you find that under the More tab at the top of our website menu. Claire has already done her part, so why don't you just help us out a little bit and add to the fun? And now it's time for the places category. This one's kind of different because it doesn't have the name Wilson in the town, but the town is known for a martyr named Margaret Wilson. I gathered together several different sources from the internet. We're going to have Mary tell us this story that is super interesting and survived the test of time. When you take your vacation and travel through Scotland, you definitely want to stop and see what this Wilson did. And here's Mary to tell us more.
Today, we're diving into a story of incredible faith, absolutely brutal persecution, and an execution so cruel it's echoed through Scottish history for centuries. This is the story of the Wigtown Martyrs. Our story starts in a place you really might not expect. Wigtown, over in southwest Scotland, is famous today as the country's national book town. You know, it's this peaceful place just filled with bookshops and literary festivals. But the town's most powerful, most haunting story, you won't find it on any shelf, because it's written right into the landscape itself. So let's take a little walk through Wigtown. We're going to look at the town as it is today and how it was way back in the late 17th century. Because just beneath that calm, serene surface lies a violent and very important secret. I mean, just picture it. You're walking through town, enjoying these beautiful views over the Solway Firth. It's a gorgeous, tranquil setting. But in 1685, this exact same shoreline became the stage for a horrific public execution. It's that stark contrast that makes the story we're about to get into all the more chilling. Okay, to really understand what happened here, we need to step back in time. We're going to one of the most turbulent, most violent periods in Scottish history, a period that earned itself the grim nickname, the Killing Times. So at the very heart of this conflict were the Covenanters. The core of their belief was actually pretty simple, but boy was it revolutionary. They were Presbyterians, and they signed this covenant, basically saying that no king or queen on earth could be the head of their church. For them, that job belonged to Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ alone. Now, this wasn't just a simple religious disagreement, you see. This was a direct challenge to the king's absolute power. And in the eyes of the crown, that was treason. The government's response? It was swift, and it was severe. They introduced something called the Oath of Abjuration. The demand was simple. Swear allegiance to the king as the head of the church or face execution right there on the spot. No trial. For men, the punishment was hanging or being shot. For women, it was drowning. And you can see just how quickly everything went downhill. The Killing Times kick off in the 1680s. That brutal oath is introduced in 84. And then, just 1 year later, on May 11th, 1685, we arrive at that fateful day in Wigtown. All right, so let's put a human face on this huge historical conflict. The story is most famously remembered through the lives of two women who, as it happens, shared the same first name. Let me introduce you to Margaret MacLachlan and Margaret Wilson. Their stories really show you the sheer breadth of the Covenanter movement. On one hand, you have a 63-year-old widow. On the other, an 18-year-old girl. They're from totally different walks of life, but they were united by their refusal to compromise on their faith. And they were captured after someone betrayed them to the authorities. And here's where it gets even more heartbreaking. Margaret Wilson's younger sister, Agnes, who was just 13, was also arrested. Her father, Gilbert, managed to save her by paying a crippling fine of £100. I mean, that was an enormous sum of money back then. This one number tells you so much about the family's desperation. It totally ruined him financially, and he was left with absolutely nothing to save his older daughter, Margaret. And, you know, while the two Margarets are the most famous, it is so important to remember they weren't the only ones. In total, 5 Covenanters were executed in Wigtown that year. 3 men, William Johnston, John Milroy, and George Walker, were all hanged for the exact same cause. So this brings us to the execution itself. The method that was chosen for the two Margarets was particularly horrific. It was designed not just to kill, but to terrify. The two women were taken down to the mudflats of the River Blodnoch and tied to stakes. And the strategy here was just pure psychological torture. Margaret MacLachlan, the older woman, was staked further out in deeper water. The authorities were hoping that as 18-year-old Margaret Wilson was forced to watch her companion slowly drown in the rising tide, her own resolve would break. But it didn't work. The strategy completely backfired. According to the historical accounts, Margaret Wilson was actually strengthened by the sight. She refused to renounce her beliefs. Instead, she reportedly started singing psalms and quoting scripture as the cold water of the Solway Firth rose higher and higher around her. And here's the final tragic twist in all of this. Historical records from the Privy Council in Edinburgh actually show that a reprieve, a pardon, was granted for both women. But whether the news just arrived too late or if it was simply ignored by the local authorities in Wicktown, we don't know for sure. But either way, the executions went ahead. Of course, the story didn't end with their deaths. The sheer brutality of what happened made sure it would never be forgotten. So let's take a look at how this local tragedy got carved, quite literally, into the national memory. One of the most prominent reminders stands right on Windy Hill overlooking Wigtown. This obelisk, put up in 1858, doesn't just commemorate the two Margarets, but all the Covenanter martyrs from the area. It makes sure their story is literally part of the landscape, and their memory is preserved in so many different places. You can go and visit their graves in the local churchyard. You can see the stone pillar that now marks the execution spot out on the marsh, visit that Windy Hill monument, and there's even an ornate statue in Stirling dedicated to Margaret Wilson, who became a kind of Victorian-era heroine. Now, it's worth noting that history is rarely simple, right? The story is incredibly powerful, but back in the 19th century, some historians did start to raise questions about the event, creating a debate about whether the drownings happened exactly as they'd been told. Still, the traditional account remains really deeply embedded in Scotland's history. And that leaves us with one final thought. Whether you see it as a story of unwavering faith, a symbol of resistance against tyranny, or a cautionary tale of religious persecution, the story of the Wigtown martyrs has survived. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What is it that gives a story the power to outlast centuries and to be permanently carved into stone?
But before we go on to the thing topic, I want to direct your attention to one of the nonprofit organizations that we support from the sales of personalized Cuz merch. It is the Lydia Wilson Foundation, and they happen to be from Scotland. They help people in need in the UK and other parts of the world like Nigeria and Ukraine, and we kind of know how dangerous those places are right now. You can find them by scrolling down a little bit on our homepage and clicking Cuz merch. And then when you go to that page, scroll down a little bit, and you'll find their information and the logo. Click on that logo, and it will take you to their website. And I reviewed that website a little bit, and it's pretty amazing what they've done recently. For our thing topic, you'll certainly recognize the product in focus, but it was a Wilson that made it personal. And that turned into a symbol of Scottish heritage, and it's worn all over the world.
Hey, welcome. Today we are pulling back the tartan curtain to get into the real story of one of the most iconic pieces of clothing in the world, the Scottish kilt. You know, what we think we know is usually just stuff we've picked up from movies. But the actual history, it's way more surprising and honestly a whole lot more interesting. So let's start with that image we all have in our head. Okay, so if your first thought is Mel Gibson and Braveheart charging across a battlefield in a big flowing tartan kilt, well, I'm here to tell you that iconic image is off by about, 300 years. Yeah. So what did a real 13th century Scotsman wear? That question right there is the key to this whole story. We're basically going on a journey from myth to reality. On one side, you have the popular idea of the kilt as this ancient, timeless battle uniform. And on the other, you have the actual history, a really fascinating story of evolution about how a simple, practical blanket became this powerful symbol of identity. All right, let's dive in. We've got to start at the very beginning, way before the kilt as we know it even existed. To really find its roots, we need to look at what the early Gaels in both Scotland and Ireland were actually wearing day to day. So this was the standard outfit, the lean. At its core, it was a long tunic, hitting about the knee for men. Now, by the 1500s, these could get pretty fancy, with big pleated skirts and long drapey sleeves. But here's the crucial thing to remember. This was a shirt, a single piece of clothing. It was not a separate kilt. Now here's where it gets really interesting. To stay warm, they wore a woolen mantle or shawl over the lean. And in Scots Gaelic, this was called a plaid, which literally just means blanket. And it's this humble blanket, you guys, that is the true ancestor of the kilt. So as we get towards the end of the 16th century, wool starts getting cheaper. And so these blankets, these plaids, they get bigger. And a bigger blanket led to a totally brilliant idea. And this is it, the filet moire, or the belted plaid. Most people call it the Great Kilt. This was the very first true kilt. It wasn't some tailored garment. It was just a super clever way to wear a giant blanket. You'd bunch up the cloth, gather it into folds, and literally belt it around your waist. And you know what's cool? We can date this pretty accurately. This description from 1594 is the very first clear, undeniable record we have of someone wearing a belted plaid. It points out that you could spot the Scottish mercenaries because they wore their belts outside their cloaks. So right there, that tells us the kilt story doesn't start in the Dark Ages, but at the tail end of the Renaissance. So how did they even put this thing on? Well, picture this. You'd lay out a few yards of cloth, bunch up the middle part, and then you'd lie down right on top of it. You wrap the ends around your front, pull a belt on super tight, and then stand up. The bottom part becomes the kilt, and the extra fabric on top, that could be a cloak, a hood, or even a big pocket to carry stuff. It was like a Swiss Army knife of clothing, absolutely perfect for that wild Highland weather. Okay, but that huge, practical garment is still a long, long way from the sharp, tailored kilt we see at weddings today. So, how did we get from point A to point B? How did it evolve into its modern form? This timeline just lays it all out so perfectly. You start with the big belted plaid. Then comes the little kilt, or filibag, which was basically just the bottom half of the great kilt, no extra cloak part. Then, in the 1790s, you see the military start sewing the pleats down, creating the first real tailored kilts. And finally, the super intricate knife pleating that we think of today, that really became popular for everybody else around 1900. Now, you might have heard this story about an English factory owner, a guy named Rawlinson, who supposedly invented the smaller kilt for his workers. Yeah, historical records are pretty clear. That's a total myth. The little kilt was just a natural, practical step in the evolution that was already happening way before this guy came along. Okay, we've talked about the kilt itself, but what about the fabric? What about the tartan? This is where the story takes its most surprising turn of all. This whole idea that every clan has had its own ancient, unique tartan for centuries. So let's ask the question directly. Back in the 1600s, did a member of Clan MacDonald wear a specific MacDonald tartan to show who he was? Did the Campbells have their own pattern to set them apart from, say, the McGregors on a battlefield? The short answer is a hard no. The whole concept of a clan tartan system is way more modern than you think. See, early weavers were artists. They used local plants and minerals for dyes and made patterns based on their own creativity, or maybe what a customer wanted. You picked a tartan because you liked how it looked, not because of your last name. So where did the system we have today come from? Well, it was really a combo of the Industrial Revolution and some absolutely brilliant marketing. In the late 1700s, a company called William Wilson & Sons started mass-producing tartan. They standardized all the patterns, first just giving them numbers. But then, and this was a stroke of genius, they started giving those patterns the names of towns, and then eventually the names of powerful clans. It was just a fantastic way to sell more cloth. And this slide just shows you how incredibly successful that marketing was. Around the year 1800, you maybe had 100 name tartans. Today, there are over 7,000. The whole romantic revival of Scottish culture in the 19th century, with people like Sir Walter Scott and Queen Victoria getting on board, just poured gasoline on the fire. And just like that, the clan tartan system was born. So what does this all mean? If the kilt and the clan tartan aren't as ancient as the stories say, does that make them any less important? Any less authentic? I absolutely love this idea because it just nails it. Historically, you chose a tartan because you liked it. That's it. So in a weird way, the most traditional thing you can do today is just pick a pattern you think looks great, regardless of the name attached to it. So here's the real takeaway. Knowing the true history doesn't take anything away from the kilt. If anything, it makes it richer. It's not some dusty old relic from the past. It's a living tradition that grew and changed over hundreds of years to become the powerful, globally recognized symbol of Scotland that it is today. And all this kind of leaves us with one last big thought. The kilt proves that traditions don't have to be thousands of years old to be real or authentic. They can be shaped, they can be marketed, they can evolve. Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What is it that truly gives any tradition its lasting power? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, and Mary. Well, I wanted to know what that pouch was that is hanging down in front of the kilt. I didn't know the name of it and pretty much didn't know what it was used for. So I did a little bit of research, and since traditional kilts don't have pockets, the sporran was developed as an accessory to hold essentials like money or keys. I bet they needed a place to put their debit cards because they probably had vending machines on the side of their battlefield so they could go buy some more arrows or something. And they probably didn't. I'll put a link in the show notes for a video of two Scots describing the sporran, and it is very interesting because there's different types of sporrans worn depending on the occasion. There's a day sporran, a semi-dress sporran, a dress-up sporran, a horsehair sporran. Okay, this is the Cuz Buzz section for Wilson's in the news within the last week. Owen Wilson stars in a new animated movie called Charlie the Wonder Dog. It was released on January 16th in theaters, and that was less than a week ago. I put a link in our show notes for the trailer. It looks pretty fun to me. In sports, we keep the focus on the UK with professional snooker player Kyren Wilson. He etched his name into snooker history by capturing his maiden Masters title in a dramatic final at London's Alexandra Palace on January 18th, just a couple days ago. That was so nice of him to make the headlines just in time for my episode about Wilsons in the UK. And of course, there'll be more winning Wilsons in our free Cuz Buzz newsletter, so be sure and sign up for that one at cuzwilson.com. And last week, instead of having the Wilsons in sports, I made a document for the winning Wilsons of 2025. And boy, it's a big one. So make sure you go back to the homepage and click the trophy, and that will take you to that list. And I probably didn't even get 75% of the ones that I should have been on the list. Let me know if I missed you or your friend's accomplishment, and I'll put them on the list too, and we'll keep that building for a few months. Uncle Willie asked me, do you know what kind of fish the Scottish knights would eat just before they went into battle? They ate swordfish. If you want, you can help by recording your own Uncle Willie joke by clicking on the microphone at the bottom right of our homepage, and I might play it in a future episode. Next week will be the third episode in the introduction trilogy, and I will answer the question, what made you want to start a podcast? I'll interview the talented Wilson who was the inspiration for my quest of Wilson knowledge and the reason for the Cuz Wilson Show. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you for following along, and remember to share this with all your friends and family named Wilson and anybody else that might want to learn some interesting history. See ya, cuz.